where we've been getting more reaction to this midterm budget, of course, and the passing of FW De Klerk. And Devan Murugan, what's the sentiment there on the passing of De Klerk? I know speaking to a number of other of your guests a little bit earlier, they expressed their feelings.
Yes, indeed. I must tell you that the passing of FW De Klerk has certainly settled on the Parliament precinct. I mean, a lot of people have been speaking about his place in South African politics, and mind you, leaning towards even the Finance Ministry, both the DG and the Finance Minister, Anna Godongwana, paying respects to the family. We had the President not so long ago give an exclusive just address to some of the journalists here on paying condolences and respects to Mr. De Klerk's family. So indeed it has resonated. In fact, what I will do with our next MP, Steve Swart from the ACDP, Mr. Swart, I'll probably throw that question to you before we talk and you give us your impressions on the budget. What do you make of news of the passing of FW De Klerk when you consider his place in this country's politics?
Well, we are deeply saddened to learn about his passing. And on behalf of the ACDP, we would like to express our deepest condolences to his family, to his friends on this sad news. He played a very important role in the negotiations and the transition to a peaceful South Africa. And he and former President Nelson Mandela, as we know, won the Nobel Prize for Peace. So he leaves a rich legacy in South Africa. And we know from a Christian perspective, blessed be the peacemakers, and he was definitely a peacemaker. And so we would again like to say that we are praying. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family and friends of former President FW De Klerk.
Shifting to the topic where we looked at numbers today, numbers that would tell us where this economy is going and what the future of livelihoods are with South Africans. What did you make of the medium-term budget? There were some pros, some cons. With a lot of social activists and many South Africans are not getting the grant confirmation as they expected. At the same time, we've got a tax revenue windfall. Overall, how was the budget for you delivered?
With one of the hardest and longest lockdowns worldwide, if you consider where we were last year, if you consider where we were in December, the hospitality, tourism industries closing down, and then of course the unrest that we had in July. This had a severe impact on economic growth, but notwithstanding that, we are pleased that economic growth is projected to come in at 5%. Now, whilst that will then deteriorate and go down over the medium term, at least it does indicate that there is economic growth and that there is some positive aspects coming out. And aligned to that, of course, is the commodities boom that has resulted in 120 billion rand additional tax that has come in, and some of that has gone to the COVID-19 relief fund, some of it has gone to the public service gratuity, which of course is contentious, because one of the issues that has resulted in the problems with our budget is the burgeoning and spiraling public sector wage bill, which is then translated into the debt, which of course for the ACDP is a major concern.
The Minister did, if I can interject there, the Minister indeed did flag that as a big risk, the public sector wage bill. But one wonders whether or not he can really get a hang on this one, because unions are pushing back, the wages are going up, and when that mining commodity boom dies down, this economy is not generating the kind of money that we would need to even consider a basic income grant. So what's your take on that?
No, well, the issue is he's not the first minister to raise this. Former Minister Tito Mboweni raised the same issue. And the question is, the Treasury is aware of this problem, but does the minister have the political support, which previous minister tried to impose the ceiling, and of course we see the extra 20 billion that was required. So the challenge then is, if you give in to the trade unions, you have an escalating wage bill, and of course that is the biggest concern for the ACDP and many others, is the spiraling debt of the state, which is now this year estimated to be 69% of GDP, which is unsustainable in the long run, and you have in your debt service costs crowding out 269 billion, crowding out expenditure on much needed items. So whilst there are some positives, obviously the Eskom crisis is the most serious crisis when one looks at the challenge to economic growth, job creation going forward. That's got to be dealt with urgently and addressed urgently.
Well, Steve Swath, thanks very much indeed for your time. At this point, I would like to just call in Mr. Wouter Wessels from the Freedom Front Plus. I mean, perhaps let me just start with a very similar question that I started with Steve, with the passing of FW De Klerk. That put a bit of a cloud on the budget this afternoon. What's your view of the man, and how did you receive the news?
Well, on behalf of the Freedom Front Plus, our sincere condolences to his family, to his friends, and also to the FW De Klerk Foundation as a whole. It is a shock. We did know that he suffered from cancer for very long, so it's also most probably a relief. But death is always sad, and that's why our sincere condolences. He did leave a legacy. He had a huge part to play in South Africa's history, especially in the transition, and you will be remembered for that.
Yeah. I mean, some of the postures that came out from the President and the Finance Minister and other MPs here was one of condolences, one that recognized FW De Klerk, despite the fact that there was still some controversies around his views on the definition of apartheid and so forth. Do you think that controversy will stick around and hover around, or how do we remember him by?
Most probably, but no person is only good or only bad. And no person, none of us, only do good or only do bad. So there should be a balanced view of his life, of the contribution that he did make, and also he should be judged for the time in which he served in cabinet, in which he served in Parliament, and which he then became president and made certain changes. So he should be judged in the context of that time frame.
So to the news of Parliament, was this an inspiring budget for your party?
No, there was nothing new. The minister didn't actually say anything new that we haven't heard or that wasn't said by previous ministers of finance. And he identified the crisis, and that's good. He identified solutions, quite obvious solutions, but the problem is, will he be able to implement it, or will government be able to implement it? Because the governing party's policies and ideology is hindering the implementation thereof. To get economic growth, you need policy certainty, and you need to create a conducive environment for the private sector to invest and create jobs. And that we can't have under the current government, and there's no political will to actually solve the situation.
Wouter Wessels from the Freedom Front Plus, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. I want to bring in politically, yes. But at the same time, he does just, in a very large sense, also fit in the reconciliation picture, doesn't he? So when you pass the message on to the young ones, how do you reconcile that?
Well, of course, you have got to infuse that message of reconciliation, which is actually found or cemented in the notion of a government of national unity, because the purpose of a government of national unity was to make sure that we could be able to, have a semblance of a construct of a rainbow nation where our people, black and white, could be able to coexist, exercise their right to vote and construct a government they want. That's why the ANC, even now on the 1st of November, when we went out to ask for people to vote, it was not only just about asking them to vote for the ANC. We were asking them to go and exercise that important democratic right. Because when they vote, they can then make a determination of the kind of a society that they want to construct. This is what the ANC stood for. Remember, we subscribe to non-racialism ourselves. We subscribe to a country where everyone has got access to opportunities, black and white. That's what the ANC stand for.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and speak about the budget now, Paul. From an ANC perspective, we just had the municipal elections. We know the showing was somewhat disappointed, depending on where you're standing. And yet we come to a budget and millions of people get the news that, look, there's no confirmation of a grant. The finance minister had made it clear that a permanent grant beyond March 2022 will have to go hand in hand with some sort of certain revenue. What's your take on that?
Well, of course, we do welcome the medium-term budget policy statement as presented by our newly sworn-in Minister Enoch Godongwan. It is a pro-poor, we are making a pro-poor statement because this was a pro-poor budget. 60% of that expenditure has been directed towards basic services. The need to look at various other innovative forms of being able to generate additional revenue, so that your social relief that you had introduced under conditions of COVID could then be sustained. This now begins to talk about to an ANC-led government that really is concerned about the plight and welfare of our people.
Yeah. Are we doing enough on the side of actually enticing business to come to this country? Because we've got the structural reform on the agenda. The finance minister does talk about it, but it seems that there could be political hurdles to stop the pace of it from rising. And I'm talking about labour legislation, I'm talking about infrastructure, power certainty, whether it's spectrum. What's the feel of the pace of that movement?
Well, we are doing enough to be able to attract investment. There is an infrastructure of special infrastructure office established in the office of the president, led by Dr. Sputla Ramokgopa, which has gazetted a number of projects, and some of those projects are now at a point where they are now beginning to bring in shovels. You could see in Pretoria there was a massive property development project that the president went and launched. It's part of all of those. There's the Lanseria Smart City project. A lot of work is happening there. They've already done a number of sort training there. So there is movement as it comes to investors coming into the country, being able to really win that kind of an appetite.
I'm going to leave it there. Pull him up from the ANC. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us. So there you have it. That's some opinion, first of all, on FW De Klerk, but also on what the Finance Minister, eNCA Godongwana, is saying. I mean, some good, some bad, but of course, as we said time and time again this afternoon, this was a prudent budget that was put forward, and it's not going to be easy. There are going to have to be sacrifices, Brad Dan.